Right. Should all be getting your announcements. All right, let's see how many people we have. Okay, so we're at about 24 people. I feel like I'm warm and fuzzy about getting this started.
Yeah.
So welcome to everybody to the performance evaluation refresher training session on this soggy day. I don't know when this weather will lighten up, but definitely enjoy it while we can, I guess. So I'm really excited because we have David Fuller here today to facilitate this session. Now, for those of you that don't know David, because I know some people have probably taken his training sessions, but he's a training consultant with Campus Human Resources, Learning and Organizational Development. David's worked with the university, so for UCLA for 3.5 years, and about 25 years as a leadership development professional across several industries, including entertainment, finance, healthcare, and social services. So looking at that, I'm assuming, David, there's not really a lot you haven't seen or heard before in your career. So I feel like we're in good hands with some questions that we may have along the way. So of course, once I do hand this off to David, he will be sharing some of the best practices that he recommends and per policy. Also, feel free and make sure you have some of those handouts handy that I sent you in the email yesterday, because we will be reviewing those. And then, of course, David will be providing us with reminders about the do's and the don'ts, because there are quite a few do's and don'ts when dealing with the performance evaluation cycle. So this will help us, I'll make it a lot easier, in the long run. So since I am recording this session, I do ask if people can hold their questions until the end of the presentation. So we will keep that somewhat informal. So if you want to just unmute yourself, that would be great. You can just ask your question, or if you prefer the platform or using the chat feature, that would be fine as well. So let's get the show started. I'm going to kick it over to you, David. And if there's anything you want to add to that or I forgot, please feel free to add to it.
Great. Thank you,
Thank
Robin.
you.
And I almost said good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. And just a quick follow-up to Robin's comment about the recording. Typically, we don't record the performance management, performance review, refresher webinars, trainings, just because we like to have the ability for people to ask questions that might be of a sensitive nature, because it's performance reviews and sometimes those things come up. And we do want to give you a chance to ask those questions without them being recorded, so you can feel like you can ask them. So that's where the request to hold questions until the end comes in. We'll stop the recording, and then we can handle some of those questions that might be a little more specific to people. Now, that said, if you have any questions that are process related, those I say, feel free to raise your hand or send Robin a chat message if you'd like her to ask it instead. Process questions, I think, are fine to ask along the way. What does this mean on the form? What date should we do such and such by? What are your suggestions for gathering this kind of data? I think process questions can be good. If your question would start with, well, what would you do about someone who, blah, 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 hold those questions until the end. If it's a people question, we'll do those at the end after we stop recording, but process questions should be good. In terms of the documents, yes, as Robin said, please do have those available. The one that I think you'll probably get the most out of just following along how I go through this refresher is the PDF called CHR Performance Evaluation Guide. It's a 2-page PDF. There is also there's a Word document called Performance Management Refresher Participant Guide. That has a lot more information I loosely follow that when I go through the refreshers, but for ease of following along, let me close that one back up. For ease of following along, I encourage you to open up the CHR Performance Evaluation Guide. Oh, no, don't leave the meeting, share the document. There we go. What buttons you click make a difference. So I'm sharing the one that I think you'll get the most out of here. And one of the things that I just want to put right up front here is the reason I encourage this document is because it's all encapsulated. And this model that is at the top of the document is basically what I'm going to walk us through in this refresher. Now, I know performance reviews are coming up. Performance reviews are the heart of what we're talking about today. But in order to best talk about performance reviews, I do want to address the elements of performance management that come ahead of the review to lay some context for the actual performance review process. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to mention here. I got that. Talked about the questions. The other thing that I do want to mention before we jump in is that the documents that we provided, the actual forms, are the version of the form for last year's cycle. This year's cycle's version of the forms are being finalized this week, like just the last 2 days. I've seen a million emails fly back and forth as those are being finalized and an announcement getting ready to be sent out to the organization. So just know that the actual performance review form you use won't be the one that we sent you. It will be a different version of the form, and those will be provided to you once they're released, or at least a link to where you can get them will be given to you. So I want to dive in now with just some preliminary kind of big picture thoughts to have. The first being that performance management ought not to be a once a year thing. Right, performance management isn't just the performance review, and performance reviews shouldn't just be a once a year thing, right? Like the process of doing the review, I emphasize performance review. It's a review of things that we should have been talking about all year long, right? So have that thought in mind. The other thing that I want to call out especially in this little workshop here is that Campus Human Resources is not very prescriptive in terms of how the performance review process needs to happen. I was kind of amazed coming here at how little Campus Human Resources actually says must be done in a particular way. There are a couple of exceptions to that. One major exception is the form that the review is done on. The tool we have no say in. We could spend this whole session talking about, is this the right way to do reviews? Are these the right rating categories? Are these the right things to rate people on? We could talk about that for hours, but we're not going to. I won't even spend a minute on it because we here today, us, can't control that. There are conversations that go on how can we best achieve those things. But the tool is the tool. So I'll teach you the tool, and we'll leave the debates on whether or not it's the best tool or the right things to be looking at for another day. The other thing that Campus Human Resources is prescriptive on, but your team doesn't have to worry about this, because you start the process early on. Like, you give yourselves good amount of time to do this, which is fantastic. And that is the end of June deadline for all reviews to be in, which for you folks is April 15, I understand the date to be. So that's great. It allows lots of processing time on the back end, and it's neat to see a department that's ahead of the curve on that, as opposed to a lot of departments that I work with who are asking for this training like the week before all reviews are due into Campus Human Resources. because CHR isn't very prescriptive in the way these need to be done, there are a lot of elements that you might have questions on that I will refer to Robin or Gina to chime in on in terms of how your department handles things. And I really encourage you, if I say something along the way that doesn't sound right for your department, please chime in and challenge me on it, because each department, many departments do things in their own different way, little bits here and there. So I'll share best practices with you. But if those are not aligned with how your department does something, please chime in and let me know that. So that it doesn't go down in history as, no, David said this is the way it is, and no one said anything in the meeting. So don't let that work against us. So this performance management process that we're going to be looking at, the model that we'll be taking a look at as to guide our discussion today is this model here. That as we manage the performance of the employees who report to us, the first stage of the model is setting expectations and standards. What are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to do it? We go from there into observation and tracking. We provide feedback and coaching on what we have observed and tracked. And then at the end of that process is the appraisal and development plan. And I also want to call out in that two parts of that. It's the appraisal. How did the last year go? And the development plan. What can the year ahead look like? All too often, we think of the performance review as just a look at the past, when really a great performance review discussion is at least 50-50 past, backward looking and forward looking. So these concepts, when you do all of these things well throughout the year, lead to a much more easy performance review process at the end of the cycle, which for you folks is April to April. So that's great. So let's start off with this setting expectations and standards. As we think about setting expectations and standards, let's say you have a new employee starting. And I'm just gonna, you can take yourselves off mute and chime in. Those of you who've been in my workshops before know that I'm just all about people shouting things out. When you have a new employee starting, could be an employee working the front desk. We'll use that example a lot today, but any employee in your department, they're on their first day. How do they find out what it is they are to do? Anybody? When you have a new employee starting, what are some of the ways they find out what it is they're supposed to do? Tyler, I saw you come off.
So typically, in fact, I just had this, I just hired a new person on the IT help desk. So normally, on their first day, of course, in the morning, they're with the CHR, new employee orientation. Then in the afternoon, I'll do an orientation to our department, our team, their specific role, and try to set my expectations for what the role is about and what their assignments are.
Great. So one-on-one conversation. Absolutely. That's a very common way. What else? How else do your folks know? Yeah, Veronica.
Adding to what Tyler said is reviewing the job description with them.
Yeah.
In detail.
Yeah, the job description is a great way to find out what we're supposed to do. And I'll put in a little plug for my colleagues in CHR who work with job descriptions. How many of you, show of hands, and for those of you who aren't on camera, if you could use the thumbs up emoji for this, if it applies to you, how many of you review the job descriptions of your team members at least once every 2 years? Anybody? See Veronica, great. Gina, awesome. Chris, yeah, awesome, great. So cheers, I see that too, great. So if you're not doing that, I highly encourage you to do it, right? The ideal is every year, but that's kind of aspirational. I know how busy people get, and if you have a lot of different roles reporting to you, that can be kind of time consuming. But getting a regular review of that job description into your process is really helpful. because it can then help your employees know what's expected of them. And there is a real common misunderstanding around campus. Don't know where it started. I've only been here 3.5 years. Maybe it was true at one point. But there's a myth out there that job descriptions can't be revised without it being a great big huge thing. They can be, and it doesn't have to be a great big huge thing. Now, there are some triggers that are great big huge triggers, and if the job description applies to a represented position, someone with a collective bargaining agreement, union role, there can be more process to it, because the unions will want to review that, I'm sure. But it's not this mountain that has to be climbed in a lot of cases. So make sure that your job descriptions match the role. Okay, so job descriptions, one-on-one conversations with manager. How else do people learn how they're supposed to do what they're supposed to do and to what standards? Is that it? That's everyone is only showing people their job description and sitting down and talking with them one-on-one?
Sitting next to Nelly, what I call sitting next to Nelly, you put them with somebody who's doing the job or a similar job, or somebody who's transitioning from the job. So basically, they're not left yet. If you get that scenario and you sit them with that person, so that person can get them into the real day-to-day role.
Yeah. Thanks for that, John. That shadowing can be an awesome way. And Priyanka, I saw you come off mute.
I was also going to say that, maybe just, involve, letting the new person meet with the team members and let them understand the other's job, and maybe other team members can set the, what is expected from them after you said that as a manager.
Yep, absolutely. Desk manuals also come into play, how-to manuals. Yeah, Lynn saying printed materials, absolutely. These come in. There are challenges that we encounter here, though, that can affect the performance review process. You'll notice in the model, it is set expectations and standards. Those standards become a key element of reviewing performance. And I'll give you an example, a front desk example. And this is going to be an extreme example, maybe an unbelievable one, but it gives you the idea. So let's say you have someone starting at the front desk who's never had a job before in their life. It's their first job working the front desk. And you tell them, part of the role is to distribute the mail that gets delivered to the office. And you show them how to date stamp the mail when it arrives, where to store it temporarily, and then you'll walk it around the office to put it in people's inboxes. And let's say that the person you're training, well, they're not the best employee you'll ever have. They're super big on efficiency, but super low on common sense. And they think, well, it takes me 20 minutes to walk the mail around. I can save a lot of time for the department if I only do that once a week, right? Because if I do it 20 minutes a day for 5 days, well, that's going to take, an hour and some. So, but if I just do it once a week, 20 minutes and it's done, I've saved all this time. Except we want the mail delivered every single day, right? In fact, we probably want it delivered within an hour of campus distribution services getting it to us. That's a standard, right? Where we encounter this in other elements might be deliver a report that is fully proofed, no punctuation errors, no grammatical errors, no numerical errors, right? It might be serve faculty requests within 24 hours, right? Those standards become key. And why they become key is as things get elevated, performance issues to employee and labor relations, one of the most common themes that comes up in these disagreements between managers and their employees is the employee saying, well, I didn't know I was supposed to do it that way. No one ever told me I had to do it by then. No one ever told me that it had to be done in this particular manner. So those standards become key. If you have folks who have been doing a job a really long time, They're really good at it. Sometimes you don't have to be as prescriptive with the standards, right? They know what they're doing. They've done it forever. They've done it at 6 different companies. But especially with newer employees who don't yet know the work, don't yet know how we do things, sometimes you need to get really prescriptive with standards. You have to be very specific. So one of the things to think about then is, where in your own processes are you establishing standards? Is that a gap that you have in terms of your own employees? Have you clearly established standards so that people know exactly what's expected of them? So this is that first part of the model, setting expectations and standards. What challenges do you have? Are there challenges that you're experiencing with setting expectations and standards that we can kind of use group wisdom here? I can offer some best practices on how to tackle those. Any challenges with setting expectations and standards? Okay. One of the, I'll raise one myself because it comes up a lot in these workshops, but sometimes folks don't feel like they can bring it up. I have an employee who's been in this job for 15 years, and I want it done a different way as a supervisor because I can see a more efficient way. But the employee says, I've been doing this way for 15 years. It works just fine. All right. Does anyone face, well, I won't ask that because we're recording. If anyone is facing that, just know the manager gets to set the expectations and standards. It's good to have that as a collaborative process. I'm not saying be dictatorial and say, this is the way it will be done. But if in having that collaboration, you determine, no, the new way is the way it needs to be done, not the way it's been done for the past 10 years, you are allowed to change those standards, to update them, to enhance them, to adapt them to the current context, not the context that was 10 years ago. That is a challenge that's faced pretty regularly, especially in an employment setting like UCLA is, where we have people who are here for years and years and years, and that's phenomenal for institutional memory and for retention purposes. It's a great thing to have, but it can bring up those challenges. Okay. Any thoughts or comments before we leave this part of the model and go to the next part about observation and tracking? Any thoughts, comments, questions? Okay, great. Then let's talk about observation and tracking. What are some of the ways currently that you observe and track the performance of your employees? You've set the expectations and the standards. How do you observe and track to make sure that those expectations and standards are being met? And again, just take yourselves off mute and chime in. Yeah, Veronica.
One-to-one meetings with your staff member?
Absolutely, beautiful. Yeah, have those conversations in one-on-ones. I see from Lynn, keep notes on desktop. Let me pop the chat open here. Keep notes on desktop. Yeah, well, before I tell you my system, let me hear others. What are some other ways that folks are observing and tracking performance?
Kind of reviewing the work product, like actually, kind of checking what they do, make sure it meets the standards, for your team, make sure it meets the requirements for the business user, the end user.
Yeah, absolutely. Eyes on the product. Yeah. Luis.
Oh, sorry. Just observing every other day how the performance are. That's another way you can just actually testify what the performance is. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What else?
Ask co-workers, people that they interact with, how do they do?
Yeah, that's a really good way. What do their coworkers say? Who are the people who are interacting with the employee? What do they have to say? I'll add a tip in there to that, especially in our setting at UCLA. One thing I will say is a best practice that I want you to always practice this is if you have a team of people who are reporting to you, if you ask one of those employees surrounding people, how is this person doing in their role? Be sure to do that for all employees. You don't want to just hone in on one employee and ask their coworkers how they're doing. You want to make sure to apply that practice equally, which should be fine because it's a great practice to have, right? So that any departments, any of your teams use feedback surveys, customer success surveys, customer feedback surveys. That's another great way to find out how employees are doing. In my own world, one of the things I'm super duper digital, like I'm a tech geek through and through. But when I have a team in terms of observation and tracking, I'm super analog. I like to keep a paper folder, the kind with the two brads on either side where you two-hole punch the paper and put it on. On the left-hand side, I keep a few sheets of blank paper. On the right-hand side is for documents I print out. Left-hand side, those are just my notes. And I aspire to take 5 minutes at the end of each day to think through the day, to make a note for myself of were there any performance things, great or not great, that I want to remember at performance review time. The reality is it happens 2 or 3 times a week. And then on the right-hand side are, if they did a fantastic report, I'll copy the first page of it and just make a note on, this report was great and here's why, and put it in the folder. If they wrote a great email, or if they wrote an awful email that really required some fixing, those will go on the left-hand side. So that at the end of the year, I have all of that just to flip through to remind me in putting together the performance review. My memory can be horrible for the details from year to year. The paper reminds me. Whether you keep a digital log or a paper log, you want to make sure that you keep that information as protected as you would any other personnel records, right? So if it's my paper files are always in a locked file drawer. If it's a digital log somewhere, make sure it's password protected. Those are the things to keep in mind. How many of you, show of hands or a thumbs up reaction if you're not on camera, how many of you manage employees who are either fully remote or are in a hybrid environment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, I see some coming up there. How are you, and again, you can just take yourselves off mute and chime in. That can cause some challenges in observing and tracking, right? Because where in a in-person environment, you might have just been able to walk by and chat and see their work. How are you working through that in a hybrid or remote environment? What are some of the ways you're doing that?
Regular team meetings more frequently than would have been probably on site.
Nice. That's a great way to do it. Yeah, just up the frequency of communication. Yeah. How else? Thanks, Chris.
Regular one-on-ones.
Yeah, the regular one-on-ones become all the more instrumental. Yeah. How else? Does anyone use any kind of online project tracking like Asana or Basecamp in your department? Is that something that you're using? Don't see any thumbs up. Those are tools that a lot of departments are leaning into in hybrid environments where the information for updates is kept online, so that anyone from the team, or at least the manager and the employee, have a central place online that they can share information with each other, so that becomes the virtual version of walking by a person's desk and saying, hey, where are you on the such and such project, right? Project updates go into the database so that the manager can virtually walk by through the database and know where things are. in that process. Are there challenges? Oh, and I see a raised hand from iPhone, but I don't know who that is. Is there a question, or was that from I have remote and hybrid workers?
That's just from remote, and I have hybrid.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I didn't ignore a question, so I'll lower your hand there. All right, good. So what challenges are you having, or are you having any challenges with observing and tracking employee performance? These standards and expectations that you set, are there any challenges you're having that we can address here with observing and tracking performance? Okay. All right. Well, then let's go to the third bubble in the model, which is feedback and coaching. Feedback and coaching. In your packets is a document called performance feedback. It's a PDF. I want to bring this to your attention. One of the things that we find to be very, very common is a manager may be really good at setting expectations and standards. They may be really good at observing and tracking performance. And their Achilles heel is then providing in the moment feedback to employees on how they're doing. They feel like they don't have the time to provide the feedback. Maybe they are afraid of how the employee is going to react. They're afraid of pushback. They don't want to destroy the person's morale. The reality is, though, this third step in the model is as critical as the others. If we don't share with our employees real-time information or super close to real-time information on how they're doing, they can't do their best, right? They need to know in the moment if they're doing something wrong. They should find out as soon as possible when they're doing things that are great, right? We want to provide feedback both for correction and for reinforcement. And this document, the feedback, performance feedback guide here, walks you through some steps that you can take in order to provide this feedback in the moment. Now, one of the things that I really want to emphasize as we talk through this quickly is when you're providing feedback to an employee on their performance, you really want to focus on behaviors. You want it to be behavioral feedback. The reason for that being it's behaviors that we're caring about here. And it's behaviors that we can ask for change on. Let me give you an example of something that's not a behavior. Customer service. Okay? Customer service is something that's important in most departments. And yet, and as valid as a concept as it is, it's not a behavior. If I say, and Michelle, I'm going to pick on you because you're just right there in front of me on the screen. If Michelle is on my team and her performance isn't up to snuff, and I say, Michelle, you're really not good at customer service. I need you to be better at customer service. That doesn't give Michelle anything to work with, right? If she doesn't know what good customer service is, how can she get better at it, right? Because it's not behavior driven, but there are behaviors that underlie good customer service. Take yourselves off mute, chime in. What are some behaviors that are good customer service behaviors? Can anyone throw some out there? Yeah, Veronica.
Listening to the customer?
Absolutely. Listening to a customer is a behavior. What else?
Being responsive.
Yeah, responsiveness, response time and how we respond. Absolutely. What else?
Demonstrate empathy.
Yeah, that's another really good one. An empathy focus. Yeah, what else?
I think really making sure that you understand the customer and their issue or their request, and not just making assumptions about what they need.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one that comes up really regularly, something like eye contact, right? Patience, Lynn chimes in. Yeah, so these are behaviors. We can tell someone, what I need you to do is to be more patient with your customers. I need you to listen more. If we're going to flip the script and we're talking about bad behavior, behaviors that underlie poor customer service might be things like interrupting, might be things like negative body language, right? When a customer comes in, I'd like you to face them, right? Please don't speak to the customers with your back to them doing things on the counter behind you, right? Please make eye contact, at least at some point, with the customers. Please don't yell at the customers. Yelling is a behavior. Please have a calm, quiet tone of voice, right? So behaviors. Employee and labor relations also will hear a couple of others that aren't behaviors. I need to fire my employee. They're not professional. Right? Well, professionalism isn't a behavior, but there are behaviors that underlie professionalism, right? How a person dresses, their tone of voice. Professionalism and customer service parallel each other very much. How accurate the documents that they put together are, how they address people in meetings. Another one will be, I really have to fire this person. They've got a really bad attitude. Attitude isn't a behavior, but what are the behaviors that underlie attitude, right? A willingness to take on work, a responsiveness to requests. You can identify these behaviors as we go along. So when we think about feedback and coaching, then looking at this performance feedback document, think in terms of coaching your employees on behaviors. Not only does it help things be more accurate, right? But when you're coaching people on behaviors, it makes it easier for them to understand what you want from them, right? If you talk to an employee and say, I need you to up your professionalism. Okay, well, if they don't understand professionalism, then they don't know what to do with that. But if you want to say, I need you to interrupt our customers less and listen more. Okay, that we can hone in on, right? Oh, I wasn't aware I was interrupting people very often. I guess I really do that, don't I? Okay, so here is a simple process a person can follow for providing feedback. And I'll offer, if this is a challenge for you, as it is for a lot of supervisors, I have a workshop called Coaching Using Feedback. We just had a session not too long ago, so there isn't one on the calendar now. But if you keep looking at the UC Learning Center, one should appear within the next month or two. I do a 2-hour workshop on this to really kind of work through these steps and give people a chance to practice how to provide feedback. In a nutshell, this is a revised version of the approach I teach in the workshop, but basically start out with a neutral statement. Hey, do you have a minute? I want to talk to you about customer service in the reception area, right? Now, here we can use customer service because we're talking broad. We're not talking specific behaviors yet. And then you describe the behavior. What are your observations? Important for you to be able to hone in, if you at all can, on what you yourself have observed. Hey, this afternoon, I noticed you on a phone call when a client approached your desk. You turned away and continued talking, laughing on the phone. It appeared that you were on a personal call. Now, notice the person here has said, it appeared that, right? I don't know for sure it was a personal call, but it appeared that you were on a personal call. And then you want to reinforce the goal. We're here to provide a valuable service, so on, so on. We want them to trust that we're working with them. A key step here then is to invite comment. What are your thoughts on this? All too often, one of the failures we have as supervisors in providing feedback is we tell them what went wrong and we tell them what we want to do, and then we walk away. It's a total monologue, right? And I don't know any of us who really respond well to that. We want to feel like any of us, all of us want to feel like we have a say in, we want agency in our actions. We want to feel like we have a say. Maybe there was a really good reason I was on the phone. Maybe it was the dean who called. It was the vice chancellor who called. And they were saying very funny things. It was not a personal call. And I didn't want to, tell the dean to wait. The dean's important, right? We want to hear what the person has to say. And then a key element of whatever the reaction to what we don't have to argue anything or everything they say. We just want to listen to what they comment on. And then invite suggestions or describe what you want in terms of behavior. And notice that invite suggestion is first here. Because if we can get the employee to come up with an idea on how to solve the problem on their own, they're much more likely to buy into wanting to do it, right? And that's half the challenge in these things. Most of us are wired to prefer doing things our way than some way someone else has told us how to do it. Right? So if you invite a suggestion on how to solve the problem, you give the person a chance to be the hero in the story and come up with their own solution, right? Now, if this is the third or fourth time you're having this discussion on this same issue, I would say you can jump right to telling them what they need to do, right? Because if you've invited suggestions 3 times and they're still not doing it, there's nothing to say you can't just say, and here's what you need to do. A key next step, then a last step in the process, is to agree on the next steps. You want to get the employees buy-in. Are you willing to do this? Will you be open to doing this? If they say no, then you have to go back and rinse and repeat. You got to go through the process again of coming up with something they are willing to do. Because when it comes to performance management, this is setting expectations and standards. Right? Here is the expectation. Here is the standard. Are we agreed that this is what you will be striving for? Because then you can observe and track against that and provide feedback again. Thanks for that conversation a week ago. I've seen some great improvement in what you're doing. Right? Thank you for interrupting less and listening more. It's really paying off. Our customer surveys are going through the roof in terms of positive scores. Right? So. That's feedback in a nutshell. What questions or challenges do you have with providing feedback as part of this performance management process that I might be able to answer for you? And if they're person specific, again, we can save them for the end. But in terms of process, are there any questions I can answer for you along these lines? Give folks a chance to find mute if they're looking for the unmute. All right, groovy. Then let's get to the meat and potatoes of why we are here, or the tofu and potatoes if one happens to be vegetarian, the appraisal and development plan. So if you would be so kind as to get in front of you, and I'll share it on the screen here, the performance evaluation document. Actually, before I share that, I will ask you, as a department, and Robin or Gina, or I suppose anyone can answer this, as a department, do you have a departmental practice of having employees do a self-evaluation as part of the performance review process?
We do have, there are some areas that reach out to their employees and have them use that as a guideline. So it helps the supervisor kind of formulate some of the goals and different things that they might have missed, but it's not a formal process where we request that everybody does it.
Okay.
It's
okay,
for a
great.
certain payroll title and above, and then the self-eval form lives on the intranet, so anyone can access it or use it.
Awesome. Okay, thank you too. I'll tell you, and this is one of the things I typically mention in the introductions. I didn't this time, but I'll say it now. I've taught performance review, completion, performance management in all of the industries that Robin listed, in healthcare, in a software setting, both an established software company and a startup, in entertainment, in finance, this process is the same at every company. I mean, even if different forms are used, even if it's done quarterly or yearly, like no matter what the tweaks are, having these conversations, it's the same. People are people, doesn't matter the role. We all react to things the same way. And I'll tell you, from a manager's standpoint, having an employee do a self-appraisal ahead of the performance review process is one of the best practices you can do. If you're not doing it yet, I highly encourage it for a number of reasons. And in fact, let me have you hear from your peers. Anyone who does use self-appraisals ahead of the process, what benefit do you find from that? Anyone, you can just take yourselves off mute and chime in. How does it help you personally?
I think it helps me gauge where the employee sees themselves and how they performed, because the purpose of getting them to do the self-evaluation for me is that I also have done my evaluations. So when I receive theirs and I look at the difference, by the time we get to have the conversation, I have a list of questions because I can see where the differences are, and I want to find out if they can see where the differences are. And it calls for a better conversation, because they're saying I'm exceeded, and I'm saying, well, you're a met. So now I want to understand, where in your performance you believe that you've exceeded? Because I may have missed it. So let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah, and I think that last bit is especially key, because, well, the first bit, super important. There are few things more uncomfortable in the working world than walking into a performance review where you think the person is a mess and they think they're the best thing since sliced bread. You don't want to find that out when you start the performance review discussion. You want to know that much earlier, and the self-appraisal, just as John was saying, can surface that. And I love the end comment there, John, that it can also help me realize where I might be wrong, right? I mean, we know we're right most of the time, but there are times we may have completely missed something. There are times where we just may have been out of the loop because we were so busy, because we were distracted, for a myriad of reasons. And the self-appraisal can help address both of those things. Someone else, how do you find the self-appraisal benefits you? Anybody?
Well, if you're doing a self-appraisal, you may be more aware, or just better at remembering your own accomplishments from throughout the year, especially things that might be 10 or 11 months old, than your supervisor, who may be might have quite a few people reporting to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll chime in that I can be, as a supervisor, I can be the worst at remembering some of the important things that happened. One of the reasons I love self-appraisals more than anything is it gives the employee a chance to remind me what they did, because it's something I may have forgotten, right? And having the self-appraisal as part of the process gives the employee that voice. When I give the self-appraisals out to, I don't have a team now, but when I do, part of it is, listen, this is your chance to tell me how you think you're doing and what you think I need to focus on in your review. I mean, I'm going to focus on stuff I want to focus on too, but this is your chance to make sure I don't miss anything, right? You know, there's no excuse for any employee who has ever had a performance review from me go, he just doesn't understand what I do. He totally missed the mark. Well, no, you let me miss the mark if you didn't put it on your self-appraisal. I mean, I don't say it like that, but that's the heart of it. This is their chance to have a voice in the process at the very end stage. But especially that, there's stuff I won't remember. Like, and if you have a team of 12 people, thanks for bringing the number of direct reports up, Steve, because if you've got a big team, it is easy to forget the stuff, right? That's a lot of moving parts. So helps you remember what has been accomplished, helps you to level set. Do they think they're great and I don't, or vice versa? I think they're great and they turn in a self-appraisal that's totally beating themselves up. That's also good to know, right? That happens too. What are some other tools you use to remind yourself of what's been going on in the performance over the last year? Just take yourselves off mute and chime in. What are some other ways you remind yourself? Yeah, Tyler.
I'll look at status reports, kind of like sample the status reports throughout the year, to remind myself, kind of what their accomplishments were, what the challenges were, kind of what they were working on throughout the year, and some other documentation that we put together on projects too. Kind of helps refresh my memory on what the person was working on over the last year, and where their performance landed on some of those projects, if there were areas of strength and maybe some areas for improvement kind of during that. It's for me, it's a great way to kind of refresh my memory on what they did over the year and what we can talk about in the evaluation.
Great. Yeah, those reports, the documentation that exists, great to go back to. Yeah, thank you. What else? What else are folks using?
I use Microsoft Planner. I found that to be very helpful for like kind of running projects and keeping little tabs on things. And then when you close it out, you can just pull a report on all the things that you've completed and when. And so that's kind of my go-to for when I've got to do the self-eval.
Nice.
I forget.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Great. What else? What other tools?
Scan my calendar. Just go back in time and see what meetings I was in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do that too. And I scan the calendars of my employees. Right. We've any team I'm on, I always have the practice that the team has visibility into each other's calendars. I like to go back if I'm doing a review on an employee, not only to see what they were doing with me, but I'll look at their calendar to see what they were doing with others. And it always reminds me of some project they were on that I put them on or that they got pulled into that I had forgotten about. Scanning back through old email becomes another practice too. I'll look at email sent from the person to me, and even just looking over subject lines. I don't have to reread all the emails. Even just looking over the subject lines will remind me of certain things. So lots of ways to pull in this data. Priyanka has talked about the one-on-ones. If you keep notes during your one-on-ones, those are good notes to go back through. See, what did we talk about? What did we agree to? So self-appraisal, those other tools, ways to gather the information, which then brings us to filling out the form. And I want to bring up a copy of the form here. Again, reminding you, this is last cycle's form. This cycle's form will be very similar. It's streamlined, as I understand it, the changes this cycle, it's streamlined a bit. So there are fewer categories that we're providing ratings on. The form itself, top of the form is pretty self-explanatory. Your review period is your April to April. The job title period supervised by the reviewer. And then we get to the ratings categories. Now, let me ask you a question. I'm going to talk overall rating here to begin with, but then we'll dive into some detail. Let's say you have an employee who arrives on time to work every day. They do good work, solid work. They get along with their coworkers. Their work is complete. They meet their goals. What overall rating would you think then applies to that employee? Anybody?
Fully meets.
Fully meets. That is absolutely the right answer. Yes. We expect all of those things from our employees at UCLA. We expect them to be at work when they're supposed to be. We expect them to do good work and to get along with their coworkers and with their manager. Those are the expectations. And if they're doing that, then they are fully meeting the expectation. And at UCLA, that is a commendable rating. It says so right on the performance review form, commendable performance that meets goals. And I know, because I've been doing this for years at many organizations, and it's even more the case here at UCLA. I know that a lot of times we give a fully meets expectation, and the response from the employee is, well, that's a C. I am not a C student, right? Anyone heard that before? I see Michelle is like, yeah, I think you. I want to share something with you that I'm going to share something with you conceptually, and then I'm going to call out a document which you can share with your team members to help. But the thing I want to share with you conceptually is this idea of a 5-point scale. If the employee says, well, that's a C, and I'm not a C student, that's a false correlation. That is saying our 5-point scale, the ratings categories, is exactly the same as an academic 5-point scale, which is not the case. And the way I like to illustrate that is, let's say you're going to go see a movie, and you have your favorite movie review site that you go to look up the movie, and that movie review site has a 5-point scale. Their 5 is it's a great movie, 4 is it's a good movie, 3 some will like it, some won't, 2 is it's not a good movie at all, and their 1 is it's a really bad movie. So you look at that site and you see where your movie is, but there's a second site that you also check just to see what their reviewers say. On the second site, they also have a 5-point scale, but their 5 points look like this. Number 5 is stand in line for hours if you have to, all the way down to number 1 is you probably shouldn't bother. They're not saying don't go see it, but they're saying you probably shouldn't bother. It is a 5-point scale. The other is a 5-point scale. But are the points the same? They're not. Number 2 here is a good example. On the one review site, they're saying it's not a good movie at all. This review site says, well, it's good, but you could probably wait for it to go on Netflix, right? So all 5-point scales are not created equal. These are not equivalent to academic grades. Similarly, academic grades are not equivalent to our 5-point scale for our performance reviews. It's a false equivalency. So when you have employees who want to make this equivalency, help them to see that they're not equivalent. There are different 5-point scales, and a document that you can share with them is provided in the packet that I shared with you. That document is called, and let me flip to it here, Performance Review Ratings Job Aid PDF. And it's the one I'm showing on the screen here. Feel free to share this with employees. Feel free to use it yourself as a tool if you're struggling with what rating to give a person. When we talk about fully meets expectations, it reflects commendable performance that meets goals. It's totally respectable, reflects the high standards of UCLA. It is a standard rating, and most people will fall in this category. Someone who gets fully meets expectations is not doing worse than the rest of the crowd. Someone who gets fully meets expectations is right in with the crowd. It's what most people will receive, generally speaking. Partially meets expectations identifies overall performance or aspects where some additional training or development is needed, right? They're not meeting the mark in a number of ways, but they're getting there. Whereas does not meet expectations, this is assigned when goals aren't met, skills aren't demonstrated, improvement is needed, and it reflects performance which continually fails to meet acceptable standards or that reasonable progress wasn't made, right? We've identified there are issues, and the issues just aren't getting resolved. Does not meet expectations. On the flip side now, consistently exceeds expectations, so exceeds expectations up here, intended for exemplary performance that consistently exceeds expectations in all essential areas of responsibility, and the overall quality of work was excellent. Okay, used when performance consistently goes beyond meeting goals. If your employee meets their goals, meets them on time, does everything that was said, that's not exceeds expectations. Those were the expectations, right? We do expect that employees will meet their goals, will do what's said. And then exceptional performance rating is intended to be used sparingly, as it's the highest level of performance. It's rare. Rating indicates the individual made a significant contribution and achieved high results under unique circumstances with minimal supervisory guidance, used to reflect outstanding achievements that far exceed goals in all performance elements. The reality is, it is not uncommon that exceptional performance comes about because of a particular context, not necessarily because the employee consistently operates there, right? Like it should be unusual that an employee consistently operates at an exceptional performance level. There's one, I can't remember if it's on the UCLA health side or something I saw from UCLA earlier, where some of the language around this was, this type of employee is one who is invited to speak at national conferences because of their exceptional performance, right? Now, that's extreme. I'm not saying that that has to be your level set, but that's what we're talking about here. Generally speaking, if you look at a large pool of employees, what you will typically find is a bell curve on this, right? There are some who say, we will have a bell curve. For every person who you do exceptional, you must have a does not meet. That's not a best practice in performance reviews. One really does want to rate an employee where they are. It is possible that a manager could have a full team of employees who everyone is exceeding expectations. It's possible. It would be unusual, right? Just know as you're thinking through these ratings, what is typical is that most employees do fall under fully meets. We do occasionally have someone who's not quite there. You do occasionally have someone who's more than there. What questions can I answer for you about these ratings? What confusion might you have? What challenges might you have? Anything I can clarify for you?
I have a question. So in our
Oh, and Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to remind everyone as I open up questions, process questions now if any questions are a particular person. So what would you do if a person does this? We'll save those for the end. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. This is sort of a mechanics question.
Okay.
The performance rating form includes somewhere around 20 evaluation criteria. And in the past, I have attempted to give what I believed was a very deserving exceeds expectations to someone who only exceeded in 8 or 9 of the 20 evaluation criteria. But some of these are ones where I would find it very difficult to give anything other than a meets expectations or does not meet expectations. So for instance, completes all I don't know, required trainings on time.
Yeah.
I can't really justify anything other than a meets or does not meet, right? It's either you did it or you didn't. And so, you know, to sort of mechanically look at these and say, regardless of what's emphasized in your job, if you're not making exceeds in 11 of these, you can't exceed expectations. That seems overly mechanical. What's your kind of perspective on that, and what's our best practice around it?
Yeah, thank you for that. I love that question. It comes up pretty regularly. And actually, I'm going to flip my share here because I realize I want to go back for a moment to the document we were just looking at, because we actually get some guidance from that. You'll notice that the consistently exceeds expectations category exceeds expectations in all essential areas of responsibility. So I hone in on that as I say, going back to the other document, CHR's philosophy on this, and there are departments who disagree. So if y'all's is a different practice, you can let me know. But CHR's philosophy is the overall rating should tell a story about the ratings above. CHR doesn't say the overall rating must be a mathematical equivalent of the average scores if these are all 1 to 5 and you total each one and divide by 27 or however many they are. That's not CHR's approach. Because there may be cases where, let's say there, and I don't know how many the new form is going to end up with. Let's say it ends up with 20 things that we're rating people on. And let's say that your employee has 12 things that meet expectations and 8 that exceed. But those 8 are the heart of that role, right? The 12 maybe tangentially relate, but they're not key, like completes required compliance training on time is a perfect example. If those 8 are exceeds or exceptional, and that's the heart of the role, I believe one can then justify an exceeds expectations rating. That said, you really, as a manager, each of us, you really want to understand and be able to articulate why this is. If there are 8 that are exceeds and 12 that are meets, you really want to be able to articulate why those 12 are less important to the role than the 8 where that was exceeds or exceptional. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yes, absolutely. And I agree. I did have one other point of feedback. The text boxes on this form don't allow spell check.
Yeah,
which is really annoying.
It is.
If this is being operated on, so to speak, that would be a humble request.
Yeah, I'll find out. I don't know if that's a Microsoft thing or if it's a setting. I've experienced that at previous companies and have been annoyed at the extra step I have to take of writing the thing in one Word document so I can spell and grammar check it, and then copying it and pasting it into the actual document. So I will make a note to myself just to have that looked into. Because if it's a Microsoft thing, I'm not going to do about that. But if there's a setting someone is missing, then we can certainly make sure that's in place. Other
David,
questions?
I could speak to Chris's original question just a little bit from my experience here at ENT. I know that for many years, there was like an expectation that like, oh, the average rating has to be like slightly past the midpoint between meets and exceeds to get an exceeds or something like that. And that had come down, I think even from our previous executive director, she looked at it that way at times. But I think we're more flexible on that now. I think the issue now it comes in where maybe Chris's request was denied for a certain rating in the past, maybe because the senior manager has a certain bell curve that they use or are used to giving out X percentage of exceeds. And it differs from unit to unit, but the managers, and that's been something I've wanted to address for years, but that's going to take a lot more work. And those managers, they do make things work out. They have reasons for doing it. At the end of the day, some are willing when there are actual merit increases. Some do want a larger gap between like a meets and an exceeds versus other areas. But we do get wide ranges. In some areas, they have lots of employees and maybe like only a handful, you can count on one hand, will get higher than meets in a given year. And you might have another area where a third of the employees are getting exceeds, and so it's tough to reconcile, you know, when you're talking to someone from another unit and they have a completely different curve. But yeah, I'm just saying that may have been something that people run into here if they want to give someone an exceeds and their senior manager or someone even higher maybe had said at the time, no, because they may have already been thinking internally to themselves like, I try to limit the number of exceeds to, you know, X number of people. And whereas maybe in some years or in some units, this eval might have met that bar. This year in my unit, it doesn't, you know. And so I get though that how that can seem very subjective, but it's just more, it's more like different objective methods going on at the same time.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and it can be, I've seen this challenge in a number of organizations. There are some ways around it departmentally where benchmarking conversations can happen a month or two before the performance review cycle, where managers get together and
I think David froze.
Hey, yeah, David, if you can hear us, you seem to have frozen on us.
I'm right here. What are you talking about?
Oh, good.
Okay.
I thought it was me.
Looks like
I know, I
Same
was
here.
waiting. I was like, wait, am I frozen too? I don't know.
no, I saw it moving, but then I have like apparently low bandwidth, even though I'm connected straight to the docking station right now. Looks like David is gonna get left and maybe we'll be coming back.
I think so. Oh, yeah,
Yeah, I think he left. Oh, there he is.
maybe he's gonna try to pop back in.
he is back. I don't know what happened.
Hi, David, we missed you.
I missed you all. You felt so separated from everyone.
I think your internet performance was below expectations.
Yes, and I'm going to give a performance review to the internet company this afternoon, where I will say, here was the standard and the expectation. Here's what I observed. I'd like to now provide you some feedback and coaching so that when my contract is up and we review the performance, you'll understand why I take the corrective action I take. So I believe I was about to say, in fact, I think I lost my train of thought. Okay, it was, oh, I know what I was about to say. What we want to make sure we do as managers is have an understanding for each of these categories of what the various rating looks like for that employee. Now, it might be specific to a role, it might be every employee on the team, but it can be really helpful if I'm sitting down with an employee and works collaboratively with fellow employees, I have given them partially meets expectations. I, as a manager, should be able to articulate for the employee, what does fully meets look like and where did they miss the mark? What does exceeds look like for the person who I've rated fully meets and they say, well, I thought I exceeded it. I want to be able to have the conversation with you, with the employee. Why do you think you exceeded it? Can you give me examples? And in my mind, I already want to know, what does exceeds look like to me so I can approach that conversation prepared. Having thought through that then really can help you articulate to the employee, here's what you need to do to get exceeds. Because 9 times out of 10, the person who says, well, fully meets is a C and I'm not a C student. Okay, well, we'll have the false equivalency conversation. But the next thing is, well, then what do I need to do to get an exceeds? What do I need to do to get exceptional? I think it's perfectly valid to have a mindset of, I need to know what exceeds looks like. Exceptional, I'll know it when I see it, right? I don't think we necessarily need to be able to articulate what exceptional performance looks like. We'll know it when we see it. But exceeds expectations, we should be able to articulate pretty clearly for the categories. So what other questions or challenges can I approach for you?
I guess, David, I would have a question going back to the point you just made. Why can we not articulate what exceptional performance looks like?
Well, you might be able to. I think,
okay.
yeah, I'm not saying it's impossible to. I do think there are some categories or some roles where some categories for some roles where it might be a little hazier. And I think that's probably okay. But if you can articulate it, it's all the better to be able to. The clearer we can be on each of these categories to be able to have that discussion with an employee, particularly when they think they're the best thing since sliced bread and I'm looking towards how do I terminate them. When we have those gaps,
It looks like it happened again.
Yes.
I just wanted to say though, it's definitely a challenge for new managers, especially when those new managers come from outside the university, because when I came to UCLA, events and transportation, my previous company also had a 5-point rating system, but it was very different in how those ratings were assigned. So I think most of the places I've worked, it was easier to give someone that highest rating. But when I came to UCLA, I was kind of informed and educated that the highest rating here is, much more rare. It's like the John Wooden level, you have to be, just beyond stellar on a consistent basis to get that highest rating. So I think that was kind of a challenge for me as a new manager coming to UCLA, kind of adjusting to the UCLA 5-point rating system. And then also I think that there's a lot of latitude, in individual managers rating people. So, when you take over management of a team, your standards might be a little different than the previous manager. So that's kind of also an area where there can be some challenges and concerns that I've seen in the past.
Yeah, and I want to tag on to that too, Tyler. You bring up a really important point for a number of reasons. One, yes, there are a few things more challenging than coming into reviewing a team where the previous manager has only ever given exceptional ratings, and you want to rate them where they really are. Then you become the manager who's evil. But one of the things that it is important to avoid, but it's something a lot of managers feel like they want to do or need to do. Never use the performance review process as an engagement or retention tool. Here's the example. Let's say I have a poorly performing employee who is not meeting the mark, and we're regularly discussing how they're not meeting the mark and they're not improving. But if they leave, this department is going to fall apart because even performing badly, it's holding things together. And so I'm going to give them an exceeds so that they don't leave, because they have told me if they get anything less than exceeds, they're out the door tomorrow. Don't do it. Just don't do it, because here's the next step of that, as told by employee and labor relations departments everywhere, and I've heard this even here. The next step to that is 6 months later, when you're finally able to terminate the employee because they haven't gotten better, they've only gotten worse. And so you try and fire them, and they get an attorney. Their attorney says, here's their performance review from 6 months ago that says they were exceeding expectations. And you say, well, I only did that so that they wouldn't quit. They told me they'd quit. A court will go, or even employee and labor relations, because their job is to help keep us out of court, will go, you said it, you signed it, you said exceptional or exceeds. We're going to have to start a whole new process now to show they have come down from exceeds down to a point where their performance is. Because now what you've established is that poor level of performance you consider exceeds, which actually gives them latitude to get worse, and you can't do anything about it because you've said the poor performance is exceeds. You signed your name on the line. So please don't ever rate someone higher than their level to retain them, to get them more money. The performance review is not the channel to do those things. The performance review for legal purposes, for morale purposes, even if it's a temporary morale hit, like it needs to be an accurate reflection of performance.
David, if I could add to that real quick,
please.
And I know that, you know, Veronica definitely appreciates everything you just said, so do I. But I would even take it a step further and say, you know, even giving, sometimes people are reluctant to give anything less than a meets on an overall rating. They think it's harsh. They've never had done one before. They think maybe the employee will bounce back and get a little bit better. I don't want to demotivate them, but even giving them meets precludes discipline that you may need to progress down the line. And frankly, that happens a lot here. And we go back and we'll find out a supervisor knew about certain issues, but just gave them meets anyways because they didn't want to have the hard conversation, or, you know, they just wanted to get past that eval and pass the employee off to a new supervisor, you know, whatever the reason. But we go back and we find out that there were reasons why people maybe gave an employee a meets and when they didn't deserve it. But, you know, we can't be aware of what's going on everywhere. We find these out after the fact. So we always encourage people to, like, look, you know, be brave, be the supervisor that has to have the tough conversation, because you know what, if you don't, you might be shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, and let me now take that and turn it into, go back to a comment I made, and then I'll invite us to stop the recording. So if there are any questions in these last few minutes that folks have been holding on to, we can tackle. But the thing I want to tag on to that, Steve, which the point you're making is really key. I want to go back to talking about how, like, half of the performance review discussion looks back on the review period and half looks forward. That's the point then, where as managers, supervisors, we can say, look, on these three categories, I gave you a does not meet. I didn't like doing it. I'm sure you don't like seeing it. Let's now talk about the year ahead. Let's talk about, how do we get you to fully meets? Or better yet, how do we get you to exceeds? Like, what barriers can I knock down for you? What training can I get for you? What resources can I help provide you? Like, help me help you, right? Like, how do we get there? And you can use that second part of the performance review discussion as a really positive, forward-looking, optimistic, I know you got this. I think you can do it. I want to invest the time to help you know you can do it, because I think you know you can. To really spin that in a positive way, so that it takes that sting out of the does not meet. Because we do want our employees to be really good. We do want them to be their best. Some of the best employees are the ones who were not good and were given the opportunity to turn it around. They can become some of the best employees. So let's do this. John, hold that thought for just a moment. Robin, if you'd be so kind as to end the recording.